She stood barefoot on the cold lobby floor, her heels still in her hand, because the security guard had just made her take them off to prove she wasn't hiding anything. The marble beneath her toes was chilled and unforgiving, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the vision she once had for this place. She had imagined elegance, dignity, a sanctuary for travelers to feel seen, welcomed, whole. Instead, tonight, she stood like an intruder in her own dream. Janelle Hayes didn't argue when they searched her bag, didn't flinch when they asked her to step aside like she was a threat. She simply obeyed, not because she was guilty, but because she had learned long ago that resistance only made the humiliation last longer. They searched her clutch, carefully curated to match her blazer and silk blouse. They whispered into their radios like her calm presence carried danger. She didn't scream, didn't plead. She learned to hold still in moments like this, to survive them in silence. But her silence wasn't surrender. It was pressure building behind a dam. The lobby was full. It was Friday night. Guests bustled past with shopping, bags, room keys dangling, laughter echoing off the chandeliers she had personally approved for installation last fall. No one recognized her, not even the young concierge, whose tuition she had quietly paid last winter when she learned his mother was battling cancer. He now stood 2 feet away, eyes blank, as if she were invisible, or worse less than when they finally let her speak. She gave her name, calmly, professionally. Janelle Hayes. One of the penthouse suites should be reserved under her name. She had sent the request herself through her executive office just 2 days ago, wanting to test the staff unannounced, not to catch them in a mistake, but to see if the heart of the place, the soul she built, was still beating without her there to tend it. But now, looking around, all she could see was rot under polish, faces too proud to listen, eyes too quick to judge, a culture of smiling on the surface and suspicion underneath. The woman at the front desk barely looked up. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We don't see any reservation, and we don't accept walk-ins in our executive suites. That level is reserved for high-value clientele." Janelle's lips parted, but no words came out, because she had just heard herself classified as not high value. In the very space she had designed to be a haven for people of every background. She wanted to laugh, or cry, or both. But instead, she gently placed her heels back on the floor, as if the physical discomfort might distract her from the emotional ache tightening around her throat. Behind her, a white couple stepped forward to the desk. The man wore joggers and a hoodie. His backpack was frayed, and his partner had neon green nails and a Boston cap on sideways. The receptionist smiled at them, broad and warm, and asked if they wanted a view of the lake or the skyline. Janelle turned away, slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might cause the last pieces of her composure to shatter and spill across the expensive tiles. She didn't look back as she walked toward the doors, but she could feel it, that strange heat on her neck, the weight of being watched, judged, labeled. It was the oldest ache she knew, and it followed her like a shadow. Outside, the wind kissed her cheeks with a cruel sort of tenderness. Her coat tighter, and kept walking, past the valet stand where her car still sat, waiting. She didn't want to be driven anywhere. She needed to feel her feet on the concrete, needed to hear the hard sound of her heels hitting the pavement too. Remind herself she was still real. The city didn't care who you were. It swallowed your pain in its traffic noise and blinking signs. And maybe that was why she had loved it once, 'cause here, anonymity had felt like freedom. But tonight, it felt like ERACRS. As she walked, memories pulled at her like cold fingers. She thought of her mother, who once told her, "You have to be twice as good, Janelle. Twice as kind, twice as silent." And she had been all her life. She had bitten her tongue through backhanded compliments, smiled through boardroom dismissals, and dressed carefully so no one could say she looked angry, loud, or unprofessional. She had become everything they said a woman like her could never be. Billionaire by 40. Owner of 7 hotels across the country. Guest speaker at Ivy League graduations. A black woman in rooms where they didn't even save her a seat before. But none of that mattered tonight. Not to the girl behind the front desk. Not to the security guard who looked her up and down like she might run off with silverware. Not to the man who whispered, "Some people just walk in here thinking they can afford anything." She had built the building, but they'd buried her in. She found a bench at the corner of the street, beside a closed bakery and a flickering streetlight. She sat there quietly, listening to the distant hum of the city, so full of life, so full of blindness. She pressed her palms together in her lap and stared down at them hands that had signed contracts, held trembling employees, carried her father's coffin. These were not the hands of a thief or a beggar. These were the hands of a woman who had given everything to build a legacy. And tonight, that legacy had spit her out like a stranger. But what the world didn't know, what they never seemed to understand, was that Janelle Hayes didn't stay broken. She built from ruins. She rose through fire. And now, the fire inside her was starting to light again. Not with rage, but with purpose. She didn't go home that night. Instead, Janelle checked into a modest roadside motel 2 exits down the freeway. No valet, no chandelier, just a vending machine that ate her dollar and a bathroom light that flickered whenever she breathed too. Close to it, the room smelled faintly of bleach and lonelier things, but no one questioned her at the front desk. No one searched her bag. No one looked at her like she didn't belong. And somehow, that made the silence heavier. She sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and stared at the television without turning it on. Her phone buzzed beside her. Emails, calendar pings, a reminder to finalize the renovation designs for the Miami location. She turned the screen over and let the buzzing fade into the thick, quiet sleep came late. And when it did, it came in flashes. She saw her hotel, again the lobby lights too bright, the receptionist's face too blank. She dreamed of voices saying "ma'am" with disgust, of invisible eyes tracking her every step. And each time she startled, awake, the sound of her own breath filled the room like thunder. Morning came without mercy. She showered in silence, dressed in the same clothes from the night before, and forced herself back into the world that had swallowed her pride. No makeup, no earrings. She didn't need armor today. She needed air. She stopped at a small coffee shop on the edge of downtown. The girl behind the counter smiled and asked her name without flinching. Janelle almost choked when she answered. It had been so long since anyone had said her name without attaching assumptions to it. She took her coffee to go and walked aimlessly. It was easier to walk than sit. If she sat too long, the memories crept in. That afternoon, she went back to her corporate office, not to work, just to see if she still belonged there. The front desk security greeted her politely, but didn't stand when she entered. There was no welcome back. No, we missed you. Just a quiet nod, as if she were any other employee. Upstairs, her executive assistant barely looked up from her screen when she walked past. Janelle paused, waiting. But there was no acknowledgement, just the sound of typing. It stung more than she wanted to admit. She kept walking. Her office door was still locked, but the hallway felt colder somehow, as if her presence had faded in her absence. She closed the door behind her and sat at her desk, surrounded by awards, framed newspaper, clippings, and polished furniture that now felt like stage props. Her own reflection in the glass windows startled her. She looked tired, dimmed, smaller somehow. No one knocked. No one checked in. She stared out at the skyline and wondered how something so vast could feel so suffocating. Later that week, she tried to have dinner with an old friend, a woman she had mentored years ago, helped rise through the ranks in a different company. They met at a bistro downtown. But even as they hugged, Janelle felt the stiffness in her friend's arms. The woman kept glancing around the restaurant, lowering her voice as if being seen with Janelle might raise questions. They barely got through appetizers before the subject came up. I heard something happened at the Madison location, her friend said carefully, eyes darting to the waiter as if trying to judge his proximity. Something about you causing a scene? Janelle said nothing at first. She didn't have the energy to explain what it felt like to be stripped of dignity on the marble floor of her own empire. She simply folded her napkin and whispered that she needed to leave. Outside, the sky was bleeding into twilight. She stood there for a moment, cars rushing by, and let the cool air hold her. By the time she made it back to the motel, the vending machine still didn't work. She stared at it blankly, then sat on the stairs outside her door and watched the moon crawl between streetlights. A man 2 doors down sat on the curb, playing a harmonica in uneven bursts. His notes weren't pretty, but they were honest. There was something about the broken rhythm that made her eyes burn. The next morning, she woke up to a note taped to her door. Sorry if my music kept you up. It's the only thing that helps me feel human sometimes. Let me know if you ever want to talk. C12. She didn't know who C12 was. Maybe the man with the harmonica. Maybe someone else. But the handwriting was neat and the tone gentle. It was the first uninvited kindness she'd received in days. She folded the note and placed it in her wallet. The days blurred after that. Meetings resumed. Her boardroom filled with men in suits who smiled too tightly and spoke in buzzwords. She sat through presentations with a face carved from stone. Her CFO spoke to her in patient tones, as if she were the one who had lost her. Grip. I think you've been under a lot of stress lately, he said in a meeting, glancing sideways at 2 junior partners. Maybe it's time to step back for a while. Let others carry the load. She nodded quietly. She didn't argue. But in her chest, something coiled. At home, her mailbox filled with glossy magazines she used to be featured in. Now, her name was buried in side columns, if mentioned at all. No one had come to check on her. Not even the woman next door who used to borrow sugar and cry about her divorce. She didn't ask anymore if Janelle was okay. Maybe she assumed she wasn't. Maybe she didn't care. One afternoon, as Janelle walked back from the corner store with 2 bags of groceries, she saw a mother with her little girl standing outside a shelter across the street. The child was pointing at something inside the window, something Janelle couldn't see, but her eyes were glowing. Full of wonder, the mother looked tired. Her coat had a rip under the arm. Janelle stopped, watched, and then she crossed the street. She didn't ask questions. She simply handed over both bags of milk, eggs, fruit, bread, and nodded once. The woman looked stunned, almost afraid. Janelle whispered, "I've been hungry too." She didn't stay for thanks. She walked away quietly, her own hands empty now, but her chest lighter than it had been in weeks. That night, she unfolded the note from C12 and stared at it. Again, "Let me know if you ever want to talk." And for the first time, she considered writing back. Janelle didn't write back to the note from C12. Not at first. She folded it again and kept it tucked in her wallet, beside an old photograph of her mother, whose eyes seemed to stare back with quiet questions. Her mother had always told her that the world wouldn't care how many boardrooms she conquered if she forgot how to look people in the eye. At the time, Janelle had rolled her eyes. She was chasing numbers, not glances. Now, the silence around her felt too thick, as if her success had built walls too high to climb down from. 2 weeks passed. The hotel incident had gone quiet in the press, mostly because it had never truly made it there. Her team had buried it under polite emails and PR non-statements. Internally, it became an unspoken bruise. People avoided her eyes in the elevator. Her name was now whispered behind closed doors, not raised in applause at board meetings. The shine was gone. It was during one of those hollow afternoons, while clearing out her laptop of unused files, that she came across something she had forgotten. A design draft labeled Hope House Initiative. She almost deleted it without opening it. It was a project she had scribbled together years ago, back before she became a CEO, back when she was just a project manager with long hours and longer dreams. A shelter to hospitality pipeline. Help the homeless build job skills, give them shelter and dignity, and train them for stable employment within her hotel group. It had been shelved after the third investor called it a sweet but impractical fantasy. She opened the file. Inside were handwritten notes she had scanned years ago. Scribbles about sourcing trainers, rotating schedules, partnerships with local clinics, and a list of names people she'd met at food banks and shelters during her volunteer days. Beside one name was a note. He said, "People forget we used to be someone." Janelle sat back, staring at the screen. That night, she returned to the same shelter where she had given the groceries to the mother and daughter. She didn't say her name when she entered. She didn't bring reporters. She just stood in the hallway and watched. In the cafeteria, a man with a worn beanie was telling a joke that made 3 others burst into tired laughter. A woman braided her daughter's hair slowly, humming under her breath. And in the far corner, she saw the same little girl from before, playing with a cardboard box like it was a castle. A volunteer walked past and paused. "Can I help you?" Janelle smiled gently. "I used to be a volunteer here years ago. I was wondering if you needed any help again. Stocking, cleaning, serving, whatever's needed." The woman hesitated for a moment, then said, "We always need help." She was handed a pair of gloves and an apron. She tied her hair back and stepped behind the food counter, dishing mashed potatoes with hands that once signed million-dollar contracts. And it felt strange, not degrading, not humiliating, just ... real. That night, after the last tray was cleaned and the lights dimmed, one of the staff offered her a warm cup of tea. "You look familiar," the woman said. Janelle sipped the tea quietly. People say that sometimes. When she got back to the motel, she found another note tucked under her door. "Didn't want to pry, but I heard you playing music through the wall. It was nice. Thanks for making this place less lonely." C12, she hadn't played anything. Maybe it had been a commercial on her TV, but the note made her smile. The next day, she bought a used guitar from a second-hand shop and leaned it against the corner of her motel room. She didn't play it. Not yet. Just liked the idea of it there, waiting. Over the next week, she volunteered twice more. Quietly. No one asked who she was. She let them think she was just another woman between jobs. And maybe, in a way, she was. One morning, while stacking canned goods in the back pantry, she overheard two teens arguing softly. One had lost a job interview because he didn't own a decent pair of shoes. The other offered to lend his, but they were 2 sizes too small. She didn't speak, just listened. That afternoon, she returned with 3 boxes of shoes, carefully selected from a nearby outlet store. She left them in the staff room with a simple note, for those walking towards something better. Later that evening, one of the teens spotted her by the water cooler. "You, the shoe lady?" Janelle chuckled softly. "I guess I am now." He grinned. "Thanks. I got an interview again. I'm not gonna mess it up this time." She nodded. "I believe you." That night, she finally picked up the guitar. Her fingers were clumsy. The strings were stiff. But she strummed a soft chord, then another. It was awkward, imperfect, and beautiful, like learning to breathe again. The next day, she knocked on C12's door. He opened slowly, a man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a face that had seen too many winters. His room smelled of coffee and old books. When he saw her holding the guitar, he smiled. "Guess you got my notes." She nodded. "I did." They sat on the steps and played in silence, taking turns plucking at broken melodies. It wasn't music exactly, but it was enough. It was connection. Janelle began coming back to the shelter, even on days she didn't volunteer. Would sit in the hallway with a notebook, watching, listening. Ideas returned to her like birds, hesitant, fluttering, but slowly settling. She started sketching out a smaller version of the Hope House initiative. No investors, no press, just her own savings and a pilot program. She found an old motel that was for sale 2 towns over. Nothing fancy, but structurally sound. Enough rooms to house 20 people. A kitchen that could be converted into a training space. She called. in a favor from a former contractor and walked through the place with a flashlight and a vision. It was the first time in weeks she had spoken confidently. She could hear it in her voice, the certainty returning, slowly like the tide. But at night, doubts crept in like fog. What if no one comes? What if it fails? What if I'm not who I used to be? She would sit at the foot of her motel bed, gripping the edge of the sheets, trying not to cry. The woman who once gave keynote speeches in front of thousands now had to convince herself just to keep going. In those moments, she would think of the girl with the cardboard castle, of the boy who wore the new shoes with pride, of the harmonica, music in the quiet dark. And she'd whisper to herself, "You were never supposed to stay broken." Then she'd rise. The ribbon was tied crookedly. Janelle laughed under her breath when she saw it. The local councilwoman had shown up in heels far too high for gravel and had struggled to knot it over the entrance of the newly painted motel. A few volunteers clapped as the oversized scissors snipped the ribbon. And Janelle stood there, blinking against the sunlight, trying not to cry. It wasn't much. The carpet was worn. The ceiling in room 6 still leaked when it rained. But the stove worked. The showers were clean. And the people inside weren't guests. They were rebuilding. The Hope Haven Center. She had decided on the name one quiet night after a man she barely knew told her that the word home still made his throat tighten. He said he didn't need a home yet, just hope, and maybe, one day, a little haven. That had stayed with her. Within 2 weeks, every room was filled. There was Janice, who had escaped an abusive relationship and used to be a line cook. There was Tito, a man who fixed bicycles with the gentleness of a surgeon and told bedtime stories to kids who weren't his. There was an older woman named Dolores, who had once been a cleaning supervisor at a luxury hotel, and cried the first time someone asked for her advice again. Janelle moved between tasks like she was catching her breath for the first time in years. In the mornings, she taught hospitality workshops. In the evenings, she sat with residents over chipped mugs of tea and listened, really listened to the kind of stories that never make the news. She was exhausted, but she was at peace. And then came the letter. It arrived, folded in half, and left at the front desk by a courier who didn't wait. Janelle opened it while standing, her fingers smudged with whiteboard marker and flour. At first, she skimmed it. Then her hands trembled. The letter was from the zoning commission. A formal notice of violation. An anonymous complaint had been filed stating the property was not zoned for multi-unit, temporary housing and training. Her eyes scanned the lines that followed: citations, potential fines, and a threat of closure if compliance wasn't achieved within 30 days. She sank into a chair, paper in her lap, visions spinning. Later that evening, she called the commission. The voice on the other end was polite but robotic. The complaint had originated from someone with ties to the local business association. No names were disclosed. She didn't need names, she knew. A week later, it became public. A local blog ran a story titled, "From Boardroom to Back Alley. Former hotel CEO breaks laws to run shady shelter." It quoted unnamed neighbors who were concerned about property values and unsure about the type of people being brought into the area. No one asked how many of those types of people now had jobs, or stable medication, or felt safe sleeping. Suddenly, she was drowning in paperwork, inspections, and interviews with skeptical officials. Donations slowed. A promised grant was quietly pulled. Volunteers stopped replying to texts. And in the worst moment, she overheard two of the residents, Janice and Tito, talking in hushed tones outside the common room. "She's gonna lose this place, ain't she?" Tito sighed. "Yeah, looks like it." Something inside Janelle cracked. She stepped outside that night, cold air cutting across her arms, and walked until her legs ached. She ended up at a small diner 2 towns over. It was half empty, smelling like burnt coffee and old vinyl booths. She sat at the counter, ordered nothing, and stared at her reflection in the dark window. Who are you trying to fool? You thought doing good would erase the shame. You thought purpose could fix what pride broke. Tears came without asking. She tried to hide them from the waitress, who kept refilling water she hadn't touched. A memory hit her, then sudden and sharp. She was 12. Her mother had just lost her job. They'd walked 10 blocks in the rain because they couldn't afford bus fare. And when they finally got home, Janelle had asked her mother, "What are we gonna do?" Her mother had knelt down, soaked and shivering, and said, "We keep showing up, even when no one wants us there." Janelle closed her eyes. You keep showing up. But it was so hard now. Everything hurt. Her chest felt like it was caving in. Hope felt like a cruel trick. For days after, she functioned on autopilot, answered calls, filed appeals, attended meetings. With dead eyes, her posture shrunk, her voice dulled. The spark that had lit the project was dimming fast. One morning, Dolores knocked on her office door, which was really just a converted supply closet with a chair and a lamp. "Can I sit?" Janelle nodded. The older woman looked at her carefully. "You remind me of my daughter." Janelle blinked. "I didn't know you had one." Dolores gave a sad smile. "I don't anymore. She passed, cancer, 10 years ago." Janelle swallowed. "I'm sorry. She was just like you. Brave, but too hard on herself. Always carrying things alone. Thought if she didn't hold everything together, the world would collapse." Janelle didn't speak. Dolores leaned forward. "Sometimes the world collapses anyway, and you're still here. That's the part that matters." She reached into her coat and placed something on the desk. It was a crocheted patch, neat, colorful. On it were 3 words: "Still, I rise." "I used to make these for my daughter when she felt like quitting. Thought maybe you needed one too." Janelle held it in her hands, like it might shatter. When Dolores left, she sat there for an hour, just breathing. That night, she opened every email marked unread, reached out to every old contact she'd once been too proud to ask for help. She spoke on local radio, posted the truth on her old LinkedIn account. She didn't defend herself. She just told stories about Janice, about Tito, about Dolores, and her daughter. She didn't know what would come of it, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like hiding. She felt like showing up.